Barely Got Here is a collection of stories and conversations based on 24 years in law enforcement. You have the right to be disturbed by some of the content or disagree with the viewpoints. Anything you hear can and will be dosed with sarcasm and dark humor. You have the right to know the discussions will often be graphic with language and themes that are intended for a mature audience. Do you understand your rights? Then buckle up, Buttercup. We're going 10-8.
Hello and welcome back for another episode of I Barely Got Here. I am your host, Kevin Booncher, and I have got a good buddy of mine in here today. My buddy Greg is in here, and I've done a ton of work with him. Been good buddies for a number of years. I guess you could even go into the decades. And actually, Greg is the guy that hooked me up with a good friend of his named Ronnie, who actually has a podcast called C10 Talk. And Ronnie's been super helpful with getting me set up and answering a lot of questions that I had in the beginning on trying to get a podcast up and running. So anyway, that's a little bit of the tie to how I started and who Greg is. And as we get into it a little bit more, obviously we'll expand on who Greg is and the things that we've done and everything else. But for now, Greg.
What up, Kevin? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I took advantage of Greg coming in state. He doesn't live in Arizona anymore, but I got him over here. And we're going to try to knock out an episode in addition to doing some other fun stuff we've been doing. So Greg and I work together at the police department, obviously. And with regard to this episode that we're going to talk about today, we are both working as detectives on the SAU squad, which is a special assignments unit within Special Investigations Bureau, which I've alluded to a number of times. And we are on a squad. There was 4 of us. We were all on SWAT, and again, like I said, hopefully I'll get Greg in here even more, but we'll talk about some of the other things that he'd done during the duration of his career. But for the episode, like I said, we were both in SAU at detectives, and we'll kind of take it from there. So tonight's episode, Speed Bump.
Speed Bump.
Speed Bump. So again, like I said, we were working in SAU, and there was 4 of us at the time. And as I've explained in some episodes from the past, each one of us kind of had a contact or a liaison with our detectives bureau for specific crimes that were going on, whether it's robbery or burglary or homicide, sexual assault, whatever the case may be. And at that time, there was a little bit of a crime trend going on where these guys were essentially stealing pickup trucks. A lot of times, didn't they always have a camper shell on them?
They did, and remember, they were always by the town we worked at. You know, like it was either in the town or bordered the town that we worked at. You know,
close
so
to
the
the scene of the crime. Right,
so it was super close to where, you know, like our assigned area type deal.
Exactly. So these guys would steal this truck, and then they would go not very far at all, and they would, in most cases, back up right to the front door of these houses, like just right over the lawn, kick in the door, steal a whole bunch of stuff. I know they got guns in a couple of them, so they're getting quite a bit of good property, and then they take off in the stolen truck. And then we would always find the truck abandoned somewhere, again, not very far away, if I remember right.
Right.
Yeah. And then, you know, if it's a stolen truck, you could process for prints and you could do some of that stuff, but I think they were pretty savvy about that, and we didn't get much information. So it was, who got the information?
I thought it was
Steve. So Steve was actually another guy working in special investigations, but he was working on the gang squad. So, you know, like I told you, Greg and I were working on the SAU squad, which was 4 of us. And then Steve was a gang detective, but he got information on this crime trend because there was a pretty strong indication that it involved some gang members, if I remember right.
Yeah, they were supposed to be gangbangers, I think. And
yeah.
I think some of the cars they recovered was in a, you know, like high gang spot.
Okay.
You know,
a lot of gang affiliated. That's right. Gang affiliated areas. Yeah, for sure. So that was how we got turned on to it. So Steve was coordinating with a burglary detective because there had been at least 2 or 3 of these in Tempe, and then I believe there had been a number in Phoenix as well.
Yeah, you know, I remember there being a lot more than that.
It could have been.
Like it was a pretty major ordeal that was going on.
Okay.
You know, and a lot of it was all, you know, in southern Tempe. You know,
that's
like
true too.
The south part of Tempe, which is a little more Ritzville.
Affluent.
Yeah.
Definitely more affluent. And obviously these guys knew where to hit.
Right.
Because they weren't hitting in, you know, the areas they're dumping the truck.
Yeah.
They're hitting in our areas. Anyway, so like Greg said, there probably was more of them. So anyway, so Steve gets on this, and he talks to our boss, and we say, hey, we're going to start trying to work this trend. Well, there's not a lot to go on. Well, then talking to, if you guys remember from a couple episodes ago, my good buddy Blair, I talked to Blair again because Blair was out on this episode as well. And Blair's recollection was, which I remember now, we had another one of these stolen vehicles / burglaries. They hit a house in Tempe. It was almost an in progress, and Blair, and I don't remember if we had gone, all of us went. I think it might have just Blair and somebody else. I think we were tied up.
Yeah.
And
maybe Steve. How about Steve?
Probably Steve.
Yeah.
So Steve and Blair go over there, and they're checking things out. And at one point, and obviously the suspects were gone, the truck had fled. Blair goes back into the alley, and he bumps into an old lady back there and kind of says, hey, we just had this thing happen. Did you happen to see anything? Well, the lady says, yeah, there was a car back here, and she gave a description of, we want to say it was like a Monte Carlo, like a two-door Monte Carlo.
Yeah, like 80s.
Yeah, obviously. And so, Blair says, oh, that's great, and then the lady offers, she says, well, I got the plate off of it too, if you want that. So, of course, Blair's eyes light up, and I mean, that's what we got to have. Well, long story short on that, we run the plate comes back to the same described vehicle, and it comes back to an address over in Maryville, and it comes back to, there was a couple other things that tied the address and the car that made us go, this is probably them.
I think maybe description. I don't know if she gave a description of the guys in the car, or
that could have been it too.
I don't remember.
And Blair, same thing. Blair didn't remember real clear, but definitely that was what put us on the course to go after these guys. So as I've explained in the past, working on that squad, it's pretty fluid, pretty flexible. We changed hours all the time. So once we got the information on the house in Maryville, we made the decision that we were going to do surveillance and try to essentially follow these guys from the house, watch them steal the car, and or take them off when they stole the car, or if it didn't work, then we'd see them go commit the burglary. You just don't know. When you're doing something like that, you don't know exactly how it's going to all shake out in the end.
Well, and obviously we didn't have means to arrest them. We didn't have probable cause that we just couldn't go to the house and hook these guys up for committing a burglary. So we had to gain the evidence in order to arrest them. And, we were hoping that we could catch them in the process of a crime. Bottom line is, that was our main goal, to develop the evidence to arrest them.
Which is a great point. And, let's say that, let's just take that a little step further. Some people would say, well, don't you feel like you have the obligation to go make contact with them? Well, the problem is when you're dealing with folks like this, they know how to play the game. So all that would have done was essentially tip them off that we knew who they were, and then they'd probably change how they did everything. It's not like you're going to go contact them like on TV, and they're going to start crying and fess up to, doing all these crimes. So, that's a great point that even though we've got them, that's the next step is not to contact. It's you gotta catch them. You gotta catch them doing a crime.
Right.
So, yeah, great point.
Because, these are the type of guys that if they get spooked by the cops, they're not going to go in Tempe anymore. They're going to go to a different city, and then it's going to take, the local cops to, forever to develop information back on them. And, because this area is so big, you're talking millions of people and a bunch of different cities. It's not like we all communicate with each other. So we don't know about current crime trends in each different city. So all they had to do is go to the west side, and they could have ran free forever. Who knows? And
I think at that time, didn't we just have stuff in Tempe, South Tempe, and then Phoenix, or was there a little into Chandler maybe too?
I think so.
Okay, so, but yeah, point, exactly. It's a great point, and it's good to bring that up. So we make this decision that we're going to do this surveillance, like I said, and it was kind of wonky because if I recall, our boss was tied up or he had to do something or something was going on. So, they really don't like us working out of city without a boss. And so one of the guys, it was either Steve or Bruce, was kind of given the dominus ominous, you're going to be the boss for this operation kind of thing. And so we're all fine with that because we know what we're doing. And the decision's made. We're going to do the surveillance of this house. We're going to start real early in the morning, which I hated early in the morning, but I remember it because you're like, we had no choice. We had to get out there because these guys, that's another good point. Weren't they doing the crimes like mid to late morning?
Yeah, they were pretty early.
Yeah. Yeah,
which is kind of unusual. It's almost like they were waiting for people to go to work or.
Exactly, which I think was how they got away with so many of them too before anybody got on them, because they're hitting these houses, and smart, because most people are working a 9 to 5 and they're not home. So yeah, it was an early morning gig. I want to say we got out there like 6 a.m.
It was early.
Too damn early. Greg's not an early morning guy either. So
Too damn early.
But so we get out there into this area in Maryville, and I remember, and so does everybody else, I don't think we had no sooner set up. We got, again, we've talked about the eye and positioning for takeaways and go-withs and all that. Somebody got on the eye, and it was literally about, 10 minutes?
Yeah, easily 10 minutes. I mean, if that.
If that. 5-10 minutes at the most, this car goes mobile. So, that's a good thing, because sometimes you can sit on these surveillances for hours upon hours, and, for some reason they just decided not to even go out that day. So this car goes out. We start to follow it around, and it makes a number of stops picking people up as it's going. So I think there's a couple stops that weren't quite as far. I know there's a stop down in Tullison, which is, not super far, but a decent drive away from where that house was. And so now they're running about 3 or 4 deep. That sound about right?
That sounds right.
3 or 4 deep. They get the last guy, and then remember, we're kind of in the mode or the mindset that these guys aren't going to do much other than running around, picking each other up. I think they actually hit a convenience store to get something to drink or eat, because they're...
Got to get that thirst buster, man.
We got to get thirst buster and burrito.
True that.
Breakfast burrito. So we're thinking that they're going to definitely, once they drift over into that East Phoenix, Chandler, Tempe area, that's when we really got to start to go, okay, let's pay attention for the truck. What are they looking for and all that? Well, I'll be damned if we're following these guys around and they pull into a grocery store parking lot, strip mall-y type of area at, well, it doesn't mean much for the story, but it was at 43rd and Thunderbird or Cactus, and they start kind of driving through there real slow. Well, the next thing we know, and as if they pull into a parking lot, we start to essentially coordinate, who's going to take the car what direction first. So, we can't all set up in the same part of the parking lot to all say, okay, I'll take them eastbound on X street. Someone's got to be ready to go south. Someone's got to go east, north, east, west, whatever happens with the vehicle. So we're just starting to coordinate all that, thinking that this is just another stop for snacks or whatever. And they pull right next to a red GMC or Chevy pickup with a camper shell on it, which is just what these guys have been using. So as soon as that happens, we all just start to key up like, oh, crap, it might happen here. Well, no sooner do they pull up, guy gets out of the car, goes to the driver's side handle, and if you're not familiar with that older style of truck, and I don't want to go into a lot of description, but there's actually a way to break into that truck in like a matter of seconds if you know what you're doing through the handle, and that guy knew how to do that. And he got that handle open on that car door so quick, it would almost be, you wouldn't even know that he was stealing it. You would think he had put a key in the lock. He gets in that truck. The car stays next to the truck, kind of providing him a little bit of cover.
Yeah, they were like driver door to driver door. So they were facing opposite of each other. I think that's important to point out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
With what's going to happen.
Yeah. And you've heard me talk about when cops 25 or they meet up. That's how they, so you're driver's side to driver's side, because we want to talk. These guys are looking to thieve. So that was how they pointed. So the front ends are pointing opposite directions. So the next thing you know, this guy is trying to start the truck. Well, now all hell's breaking loose, because we're on the radios. Well, let's go into the radios a little bit. Let's talk about communications. So back in the day, we had...
Like early 90s we're talking.
I think we are talking early 90s. So we didn't have what we have now with regard to communications with these channels that we can hit repeaters basically statewide for our Tempe channels. We had to use what we called talk channel. And talk channel was essentially like just a big, expensive walkie-talkie. So we had maybe 2-3 miles.
See, I think you're pushing it. I'm saying a mile.
Let's go with the mile or 2 miles, depending on what's in between you.
Right.
So what it does is it's a walkie-talkie. It doesn't use repeaters, but it allows us to communicate when we're out of city, which we're pretty far out of city at this point. So we're trying to do everything on that talk channel. And so when this guy pops into this car door, and then he's inside, and he's already trying to, you don't see him, but you know he's working the column trying to get that ignition busted open to get that thing started. You got 5 guys that are scrambling because we're trying to think, oh, crap, and so for the first call is, are we going to try to stop him, right?
Yeah. Well, in the scramble, we're all driving around in unmarked cars. Like I was driving a 5-liter Mustang at the time. I think you were driving a Taurus. I mean, we were driving cars that like every normal day person would drive, and you couldn't tell the difference. But we're also wearing everyday normal clothes too. Well, we're trying to throw bulletproof vests on. We're trying to pull our police raid shirts on. We're trying to put our badges around our neck. I mean, it's not only watching these people and trying to talk to each other and coordinate, what are we going to do if this happens? It's, holy cow, we need to get ready to take these people down. And that included basically getting dressed. And none of us were dressed at the time. Because we all thought they were going to go back to the East Valley. So we still had, a good half hour before anything was going to go on.
Right. So what you do is, what we used to do, and what they probably still do, is you kind of had all your stuff sitting on the seat next to you. You'd have your vest and some of these other things on the seat. And a lot of times you'd have like something over the top of it in case you left the car. So you're trying to not only get dressed, but you're trying to get dressed while you're driving and while you're sitting in a car. So it's pretty tough. And luckily, no one smacked into anybody. But so all this stuff is going on, like Greg said. We're trying to make the first call is, are we going to try to take them off here in this parking lot? So that gets batted around pretty briefly, and then I think we all kind of come to the conclusion that, they're still in a truck. We probably need to try to take them off right here. So guys start to jockey for position, and at the same time we're watching all this stuff go down. I'll talk to my part. My part, I was set up to take these guys east. So I was actually a ways east in this parking lot when this whole thing kicked off. So I start coming over there, and the position that I had that I saw that I could do anything with was I was going to try to block in that Monte Carlo, that first car, and block it from the front. And kind of where they parked, there's a couple other cars that were sparsely there. It wasn't like every spot had a car in it, so there was definitely some gaps. So that was what I was going to do. And then, Greg, what were you doing?
I was on the other side because I don't remember if I was going to catch them if they went west or whatever. I just remember I ended up at the front part of the Monte Carlo. Oh, is that right?
No.
I was at the front part of the truck. So I was at the back part of the Monte Carlo.
Yeah, you're at the front part of the truck.
But I didn't have the truck blocked in. It was more of the Monte Carlo. Like I had an angle in on the front part of the Monte Carlo.
Right.
Because if I remember right, Bruce ended up at the front of the truck.
So remember, there's me and Greg, then there's Bruce, Steve, and Blair. So that's where Greg and I ended up. And then from memory and from talking to Blair and the other guys, Blair ended up parking to the rear of the truck, quasi front of the car, and then Bruce parked to the front of the truck, and then Steve was kind of toward the back of the truck as well. And again, remember, it's not like, if we had these two cars that were isolated in the wide open parking lot, we could box them in perfectly. But you're coming up, you're flying up, and you're trying to essentially block the best you can. And like I said, for myself, I didn't even get completely set up. Like my car hadn't stopped rolling before all hell broke loose. But so we're all moving up, we're jockeying up, we're trying to communicate on the radio. And at some point, you work together so much as a team like that, not only for SAU, but also on SWAT and some of these other things. You get a pretty good idea what everybody's going to do, and you can kind of second guess what they're going to do before they even say it on the radio. And so that definitely helps with something that's this convoluted and you get all set up. But at the same time, there's still question marks, and you still got to key off of other people and what they do. One goes right, you got to go left, and opposite. So my recollection was, let's back up a little bit from Blair, because Blair actually had a really good vantage on this whole thing. So as we're moving up, the guy's trying to start the truck. Blair stops his car at a point where he thinks he's got the truck back, or the best he can block it in, and he approaches the driver's side. So he says he approaches the driver's side, and he's like banging on the window, gets his gun out, pointing the gun at the driver, and he said it was the creepiest thing because the guy obviously knew he was there, but he was just target lock, looking straight ahead, and would not look over at Blair. And Blair's like 2 feet from his left, so he said that was really weird. He remembers it to this day. Well, he said the other thing that Blair's watching, and all he sees is this guy fumbling underneath the column. And he says the next thing he knows, boom, this thing starts up. And it doesn't start up. It like pegs full throttle, like the engine races, and Blair's like, oh shit, here we go. And he's still banging on the window. Well, when Blair had run up, the guys in the car that had stopped, that was their time to leave, because they're not going to stick around. They tried to take off. Well, from my vantage point, that's when the car squirts out, and I'm still like rolling to a stop in my car. And I'll be damned, I still to this day don't know how they did, but they somehow squirted past my car and the car that was on the other side, and then they were gone. That car was just gone. And I think since the other guys had focused on the truck so much, I think I gave it a bit of an effort to catch the car, but the thing was just, by the time I got turned around and backed up, and those guys were gone. They're gone.
Yeah, so, they disappeared. They disappeared like a fart in the wind.
Yeah.
I mean, it was crazy.
I don't know if I'd put it that way, but...
Well, yeah.
They did disappear.
They did disappear.
So, fart in the wind. So that car's basically gone, and that pulled me away from everything else. So the other 4 guys were dealing with the truck more, really. So Blair says after this thing gets fired up, that guy just throws the gear shifter into reverse. And I think he did that because you guys were kind of in front of him.
Yeah.
So he's thinking, I don't even know if he saw what was behind him.
I don't think he was paying attention at all.
Yeah.
Obviously, he wasn't looking in the rearview mirror.
No. And he probably didn't care.
Right.
Well, so the guy throws it in reverse and slams into a car that's behind him. Blair kind of jumps out of the way, and after he slams into that car, he kind of goes back up to the truck to try to get his attention, and he's yelling at him to stop and stop. And he said the same thing, man. The dude's just got target locked through the windshield. Next thing you know, his gear shift goes in drive, and then why don't you take a little bit of that?
Well, he hits the gas pedal. I mean, there was no like feather in that gas pedal at all. He dropped it into gear and gunned it, and he just nailed Bruce's car. Bruce had a white Trans Am or something at the time, and it caught like the rear passenger corner of it, and he just kept on the gas and just pushed that car right out of the way. I mean, he literally pushed the car right out of the way, and he took off like a bat out of hell. I mean, he's like bailing over the parking barriers, like going through the parking lot. He's not worried about cars that are parked around. In fact, didn't he bounce off another car?
I think he hit one other one also.
He bounced off another parked car, and he was gone. Like he was on a mission.
So let's take it back to the perspective of as soon as he started going forward, because where Greg was at, he could see Bruce had gotten out of his car, and he could see that the truck basically just knocked Bruce's car out of the way, but then sped off.
Yeah, and I saw Bruce. I saw where Bruce was. He was kind of standing in front of the truck at some point, but then I think he realized this is not a good spot to be in.
Bad spot.
So he kind of dives out of the way of the truck, which was a good move because he basically would have gotten run over or pinned between his car and the truck if he would have stayed there. But yeah, he jumped towards the passenger side of the truck where kind of I had ended up at that point.
Flash over to Blair and Steve's perspective, kind of toward the back of the truck. And the problem was, from their viewpoint, what they see is initially they see that this guy really doesn't care about anything because he just slams this truck into the car behind him. There could have been someone walking back there, could have been anything. Well, then when they see this car fly forward, the only thing they can see is that Bruce is in front of the truck partially, and that Bruce is about to get run over. And that's their mindset. Essentially this guy in the truck is going to run our Bruce over. And so they draw their weapons.
AKA Fabio,
AKA another nickname, a few nicknames. So they draw their guns and they fire at the driver of the truck. Now, there's an issue with shooting in a moving car, and I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but we try to make sure that people understand that shooting someone in a moving car, even if you kill them or disable them immediately, the vehicle doesn't stop as well. The vehicle continues to roll, and it can continue to roll for a long time.
Well, in the movies, they step on the gas, and then the car just goes forever.
That's true. And then it flips and crashes.
And bursts into flames.
Lots of flames, because every car crashes, it bursts into flames.
Cool flames.
True.
And then the fire guys have fun.
Don't start me on hose draggers.
All right.
Don't start me on those guys. Anyhow, Blair and Steve shoot at this driver because still they need to stop him because he's essentially a deadly threat. We think he's going to hit Bruce. He's already shown the propensity for violence because he just doesn't care where he's going. So they shoot at the guy. Well, they think that they hit him, and they also think that they watch Bruce get sucked down and goes underneath this truck like he got run over. So you got these two guys think that someone got run over. They fired rounds at the truck, the driver in the truck. Greg is really the only guy that sees that Bruce was fine and didn't get run over. He fell down, but he didn't get run over. So the truck is, and again, like Greg said, because I remember this, the truck is just bounding through the parking lot. I mean, it's like blasting over these parking blocks, and it gets out to 43rd Avenue, and it doesn't use a driveway. It just like blasts through some landscaping, punches out into 43rd Avenue, and it's like a little bit like the movies. On this time, truck is like skidding and sliding. The rear wheels are just smoking. And then, boom, it's southbound. So at that point, I'm on the far side of everything. Blair and Steve run up to Bruce because they think he just got run over. And did you stick around much, or did you, because you knew he wasn't run over?
Yeah, I didn't stick around at all.
You basically got on the truck.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing, and we'll hit that in a minute. But so the funniest thing about all of this is that Bruce, the guy that got ran over, he's a character. So when Blair and Steve go up and they're trying to make sure he's okay, he's like, I'm all right. I'm all right. He's like, go get that son of a bitch. So we always giggle about that because that's Bruce to a T, that, you know, he would say that. He's like, I'm fine. Just go get that son of a bitch. So now we're happy. Bruce is okay. Pretty chaotic scene. We got shots fired in the parking lot. I do remember some people like freaking out in the parking lot and running and stuff. Nobody knows what's going on. Truck is flying down 43rd Avenue. The other vehicle's gone, so really the only thing we got to hang our hat on is this stolen truck. So Greg jumps out and is basically the first one on 43rd, and you can take it from there.
Yeah. Well, and again, this happened 15 years ago, and I'm old, so my memory isn't all that great, so bear with me. Yeah, so he's cruising down the main thoroughfare. So like 43rd Avenue is a pretty good, I think it's like a 4-lane, maybe even a 6-lane street. And then he cuts off into a neighborhood. And so I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm by myself because everybody else was still back with the crime scene. I'm hauling ass trying to catch this guy. He's flying. I mean, he's doing 80 easy. All I have is this POS radio that I can only transmit maybe a half a mile if I'm lucky, and I have no clue where I'm at, like no clue whatsoever, because I had never been to that part of town. I'd lived in Phoenix for 8 years at that point. I'd never been over there, and all of a sudden he cuts into a residential neighborhood, and I'm just thinking, oh Lord, what did I get myself into?
Well, and remember too, back then, no GPS. Since these are unmarked plain cars, we didn't have KDTs with maps in them, or not. We have basically nothing.
We didn't even have a cell phone. I mean, all we had was that radio
that only worked in close range.
Right.
We couldn't essentially talk to hardly anybody.
Right. That radio is my lifeline. Bottom line is, here's this guy that obviously doesn't want to get caught.
Yeah.
And I'm chasing him.
Yeah.
And so he's flying down these residential neighborhoods, just flying, and I'm just thinking, man, this is not good. If little Susie's out playing and she rolls into the street, we got to get this guy stopped.
Yeah.
And at one point he makes this turn and he hops this curb. And when he hopped the curb, I'm thinking to myself, I feel sorry for the person that we're going to return this truck to, because it's going to be beat to crap, to shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so he hops this curb and jumps up over this like yard. And he through this raised median and jumps on this other street. And, I'm in this little Mustang and I couldn't jump the curb.
Not even if you wanted to.
No.
You wouldn't have cleared it.
And again, I every time I would go around a street corner, I'd look up at the street sign and be like, and just get on my radio and just hope somebody was listening. And I'd be like, I'm at Roosevelt and 50th or, wherever I was. Right. But I was literally reading the street signs as I was driving by. So he basically is able to get away from me, because by the time I got back around to where he had jumped the curb and got on that other road, he was gone. But you just had this sense like he was still in the neighborhood.
Right.
Like he didn't go very far because he was scared shitless.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, as he should have been.
And fortunately, Blair, I think it was Blair, kind of hopped in his car after he realized Bruce was okay. he was saying I could just barely see your car, like I was just barely making turns. And then he goes, I could barely hear you on the radio, like you were staticky, and every so often I'd catch where you were.
Right.
So fortunately, then he relayed it on to you.
Right.
And, we just kind of scoured the neighborhood at that point.
Yeah, and you just coordinate the best you can when you're, doing 40 miles an hour everywhere in a residential. So I remember that as well. And again, because I was kind of late to that party since I was on that east side of that parking lot. And I remember hearing bits and pieces of you going through the neighborhood. And so especially if someone's going through a neighborhood like that, they have to pop out eventually. So what you kind of try to do is try to jump out ahead of them and figure out where they're going to come out to the next major road and, kind of leapfrog to that point. And so that was my mindset, because if you try to essentially get in the conga line through a neighborhood, even if you're 60 seconds behind, you're never catching up. And then you don't even know what turns were made sometimes too. So sometimes it's better to try to jump ahead and then jump in up there, or even, get into a position where you can maybe slow them down a little bit. So that's what I remember. And then also and what's going on in the meantime of this is, so Steve stayed with Bruce because we still just weren't 100% sure that he didn't get hurt. Well, they started to coordinate getting us some help. And the only way to do that then is essentially, one of them had a cell phone that was kind of like the boss's cell phone that the city gave us. And then you could also switch over. Our radios for special investigations had channels that the average radios didn't, like the average beat cop didn't have. And we had a channel that we could get on that was a Phoenix dispatch repeater. So we could get on there and essentially say, hey, this is who we are and we need help. We had shots fired. We think one of our guys got ran over. We're chasing this truck through your neighborhoods. We don't know where the heck we are. And so those guys started to coordinate that.
Help.
Yeah, help. Big L in capital letters. And again, one of the most important things in a situation like this is getting the air up, getting that air unit up.
Absolutely.
Because, Tempe, we don't have one. We're too small. The big boys had them. Phoenix, DPS, Mesa, those guys have the air units. And so that was huge, getting some air unit up, because once you get those guys in the air, they have no traffic. They don't deal with traffic. They find stuff, and it's beautiful. Especially, it's not hard to find a red truck blasting through a neighborhood at 60 miles an hour. It kind of sticks out.
With the back window shot out.
And with this little Mustang that's flying just about as fast as that. So anyway, all this stuff is going on all at the same time. And lo and behold, I think it was Blair turns a corner in this neighborhood trying to jump out in front and find out where this truck had jumped to. And here's our truck parked in the driveway of a house. Like it belongs there. The thing is its back window was shot out, so it was pretty simple to see, well, that's our truck, and it's probably not supposed to be there. So Blair stops, and he's kind of expecting that he had shot the guy, so he's thinking the guy's going to be slouched over in the seat. That was his expectation when I was talking to him. And he said he gets out, and he's got his gun out, and he's making his approach up to the truck, and there's nobody in it. And so he's thinking, what the hell, And later on, we found out, and again, I don't want to bore you with all the details of ballistics and all this, but the rounds that our guys fired penetrated the rear window of the shell, but they never went into the window of the front of the shell or the back of the cab of the truck, so the guy never even was close to getting hit. And again, I don't want to bore you with the details, but glass is a super crazy, weird medium to fire bullets through. And that's what happened. And I don't know if you remember, but the other funny thing about all that chaos a little before that was, remember you were talking about you got out at the parking lot at the grocery store and you had your gun out?
Oh, yeah. So of course, you get out because you're going to help your buddies, take this guy down that just is in the process of stealing this truck.
And running your buddy over.
Right. So, you have your handcuffs and you have your gun, and I'm pointing the gun at the bad guy, and all of a sudden he drives off, and he's leaving like a bat out of hell. So, just like in the movies, I threw my gun on the passenger seat and I took off after this guy. And then after Blair found the truck, we're kind of out stalking through these neighborhoods, and at one point I get out of my car and I'm walking around, and all of a sudden I just realize, oh shit, I don't have my gun, So I run back to my car, and of course I can't find it, because it had slid between the front passenger seat and the door, So I'm digging around my car.
You like Barney. Like Barney.
Absolutely.
You got no gun.
But I did have a bullet in the chamber.
In the car.
In the car.
Not much good.
Well, I got it.
Anyway, so lesson learned on that one. Don't throw your gun on the seat of the car.
Put it back in your holster.
Right. Anyway, I always thought that was funny. So we find the truck. Nobody's in the truck. And at that point, then what you got to do is you essentially know you got a guy running loose. And, there's all kinds of concerns about the guy getting into someone's home or whatever the case. But I think that the time frame and the geography of where that all occurred, we were really confident that this guy had run in the direction of like the rear of another grocery store. It was maybe 1.5 miles away. And I got to the grocery store and I remember cruising the front lot. I didn't see anybody running. And I drove around the back of the grocery store. And for some reason, I almost want to say it was like a transient or someone that's back there. And I don't even think there was any words spoken. If I remember correctly, the person just kind of like pointed, like they knew who I was because I still had all my police stuff on and sitting in the car. And they obviously know, people don't run every day. People don't run anywhere. And this dude was like full out sprint running. And the guy pointed in a direction. And so I kind of relayed that on the radio the best we could. And we eventually tightened it into where we were pretty confident he was within that general vicinity.
Yeah, and people tend to run where it's easiest. You know what I mean? Like if
path of least resistance.
Right.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, not all the time, sometimes you can look where the car's been parked or the car's dumped or whatever happened, and you just look at the surroundings, you'd be like, common sense would say the person ran that way, and so you just kind of start thinking about, okay, this is a good potential way that they ran. And yeah, we, with the guy pointing, we kind of narrowed it down to this. It wasn't a big vacant field. It was probably 4 acres maybe. It was a pretty good size, it seemed like.
It was decent size. Yeah.
But it just had, like bushes and trees all over it. But there were like a couple of trees out there, and you're just like, that would be a perfect place for someone to hunker down and wait for the cops to go away. So
you imagine a tree that is years and years old. It's probably a good 20 feet tall, and it's like a citrus tree. One of the trees that the branches will grow off of the very base of the tree. I don't think this thing had ever been trimmed, so it was like a tree bush. It was a gigantic tree bush, and so there was a ton of area underneath the canopy of the tree that was to the ground and like solid to the ground. And, the other thing that I was thinking of when you were talking about people running is there's also a pretty common concept, and Greg, correct me if I'm wrong from your canine days, but when we had guys run, you always wanted to anticipate they typically would make a right turn. And if they made that right turn, they would keep running, and it was as soon as they made a left, they'd typically hunker down. So like they could make a right, and a left, and then you would look where they made that left turn. That's what I remember.
Well, yeah, but for all you criminals out there, that's not correct, because we don't want to give away any trade secrets.
Right, because I'm sure criminals will listen to a cop's podcast.
Well, heck yeah, they want to listen to you. But yeah, that was a pretty good rule to follow.
Yeah, and so again, the job that we were doing at the time, we all had a number of years under our belt. We weren't brand new. And also the job that we did a lot of fugitive apprehension stuff, a number of things, kind of the stuff that I spoke about in the intro. So all those things would come together, even in a matter of seconds. Your brain is basically crunching all this stuff together with, just like Greg said, path of least resistance. Right turns mean he keeps going. That's usually the same way they're going to go. Somebody pointing, you just immediately key that's probably what you're looking for in regards to what we call the clue, or where the guy went. Seeing those trees, all those things come together to really, oftentimes, we figure it out. We can figure out where they went.
Well, and another thing is, a lot of times these guys aren't all that healthy. They smoke or they do whatever,
yeah, true.
But they don't have any sort of endurance. So true. They're usually hunkered down pretty close to where either they dumped the car or the crime happened or
they
whatever.
They don't go far.
It's not like they're out running a marathon afterwards.
Right, exactly. That's another good point, There's those oddities. I remember chasing a professional soccer player kid, and that kid outran me. And that kid was still going strong after like 2 miles. And luckily, I got a lot of help. I don't know if you remember Lieutenant Kishiyama.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of, sort of, maybe hit him with the car a little bit and stopped him. And then I always remember because I went up to that kid, and I was, huffing and puffing. I'm like, what do you do for a living? This kid's like, oh, yeah, I play for I think it was the Inferno. Phoenix Inferno. And I went, oh my God, no wonder. Anyway, total diversion.
You can outrun the cops, but you can't outrun the radio.
Or the cars.
Or the canine.
Or the canine, which is going to come into play. So anyway, we got this guy. We believe that he's hunkered down somewhere in this field. But now we're at the point of, okay, so we've got a lot of units in. And this was a split jurisdiction response as well, because right at that intersection, one side is one city and one is the other. So we had some Phoenix guys out there. We had Glendale guys. And these are both big departments. So we had a buttload of marked units out there. And they're setting perimeters and they're doing their thing. And I know the air unit got up. I don't think they really got up quick enough to help. I think everything had stopped.
Yeah, because you figure by the time the car ramming started to the time where we found it and we thought we had the guy pinned down. I mean, of course, it felt like an hour.
Right.
But it was probably, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe?
I was going to guess 10 at the very most, but I don't even think it was that many.
Yeah.
So yeah, and you got to remember, for the air units, one, if they're down, it takes them a minute to get up, get the thing fired up, get up in the air, and then fly over to that scene. Two, sometimes they're busy. And if they're busy on something that's more of a priority call, so to speak, they stay on that call. So there's a number of things that could keep them from coming over. But anyway, I don't think that they were able to get over to help much. So anyway, so we're back to this thing. The perimeter's coming together. We kind of start to relay where we think that this guy probably is. And Phoenix, I don't know if it's a Phoenix dog or a Glendale dog. Anyway.
It doesn't matter.
Dog's dog. So they put a dog out and they start at the truck. Because remember, these dogs are trained to essentially follow fear scent. It's the scent that we really all put it off if we're under a lot of stress or anxiety. But when you're afraid, like a guy that's being chased by the cops, he's pouring out scent. And again, Greg was a canine guy for a while. And he's got a lot more to say on that. But that's essentially the gist of it, yeah?
Yeah.
So the dog starts at the truck because that's where we last know we have this guy at. So the dog tracks and it's tracking. And in the meantime, we're all, still trying to keep track of a specific area. And I know I had stopped and stayed on that dirt lot and was looking over the fence and around the corner. And part of the problem was we didn't want to approach these trees because I know that they had gotten some firearms in at least one of those burglaries. And again, just given the people that we're dealing with, you don't necessarily want to go poking into some bush tree if the guy's got a gun inside. He's going to crank you.
Well, and it wasn't necessary. If you have a canine on scene, dogs are much better at searching, identifying if there's a suspect or a bad guy. So there's no need for us to put ourselves in harm's danger at that point.
Great
again,
point.
we use our tools that we have.
Yeah, there's no sense in, endangering yourself unnecessarily because at that point we have the time to wait. And we know that we're going to get a dog out there because it's a pretty serious crime. One of those agencies is going to have a dog, if not two.
Right.
So yeah, great point. So, we're basically waiting and watching on the perimeter. The dog handler's working the dog, and I always remember it because he was working it along that wall behind the grocery store. And the dog was alerting, but it was kind of doing that back and forth alert, like it couldn't pinpoint where the scent was coming from. And as soon as the handler, because the handler thought, okay, I think it's coming from the dirt field. And as soon as that handler broke around the corner of the wall, man, that dog was like a missile. So the dog shoots into this tree, just buries under this tree like a tick on a dog. You can't even see the dog anymore, but man, you know what's going on because you start hearing this, and the dog going at it and everything. And so then we knew we had the guy under there. And
or a guy.
A guy. It was a guy.
It was the guy.
But yeah. Well, we've had people get bit that weren't the guy too.
Well, I've seen cops get bit. So,
yeah, true. So the dog's hitting on this guy. We move up a little bit. We kind of let the dog do its work. The guy won't come out after a little bit. Well, in the canine world, we're not going to rush in there. It's kind of the same thought process before. You let that dog work them over a little bit. Because if they're not willing to come out, that means there's something wrong. They either have a weapon or there's just something going on. So you let the dog do its job. Well, eventually, he does finally come out. He gets half drugged, but I think he half crawls his way out from underneath this tree. But man, he was burrowed into that thing.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if we would have even seen him if we would have, gone and dug around in that tree by ourselves.
Yeah, and I agree. And, again, I could come up with at least one where I was literally standing next to a guy hidden in a bush and I didn't see him for like 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
He was like within arm's reach.
Remember the guy that made himself into the couch? There was a guy that made himself into the couch.
Yeah.
You know, you could have sat on that couch and
I
never would have known that he was sitting there.
I do.
So it's possible. I mean,
You'd
again,
be amazed where people can get.
Right. That's the beauty of the dog. The nose doesn't lie.
Yeah.
You know,
doesn't have to see you, just has to smell you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So dog does a great job, does its thing, pulls this guy out, and basically we've got our guy. Well, he doesn't really want to talk at all. He was a career criminal by then. He wasn't even that old, but he already knew the system. So we get him out, and he's arrested. They transport him to a Phoenix substation. And meantime, after all that settled down, then like Greg and I and Blair go back to where Steve and Bruce are at the grocery store, because now by then we got a whole bunch of cops. We got crime scene tape up because we had a shooting, and we still don't know if somebody actually got hit or didn't. Was there someone in the back of the truck? There's a lot of unknowns at that point. So we go back there to start to coordinate the investigation so that these investigators can start to talk to us and find out what's going on. And so I remember all of that, and I remember it was pretty chaotic. Everybody was pretty cool to us, though. They're making sure you're okay, and we found out that Bruce was okay. Everything was good, but I do remember, and I'll let you tell it because you tell it better, but remember when they had to start to reposition cars and trying to figure out kind of who's who in the zoo and where this went, and shots were fired from here, and what happened?
Well, part of it is, you have to understand that, you have an officer-involved shooting, so obviously it's a crime scene, and it's locked down. I mean, it's cordoned off. You have officers everywhere. You have detectives running around. Of course, now you have brass running around. You have lieutenants and assistant chiefs out there, trying to make sure that everything's going okay. And I do remember at one point Phoenix rolls up in their command vehicle or something along those lines.
Yeah.
And it was kind of nice because, granted, we're involved in the crime or crime apprehension, or like we're involved in the incident, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
But we're not allowed to sit there and just BS with each other.
Right.
Like Kevin is taken away, and he's kind of secluded from Blair, who's secluded from Bruce, who's secluded from Steve, and I'm secluded. So it's not like we can just kind of sit around and play grab ass. We're all kind of secluded, and they assign a cop to us, and I'm not allowed to talk to Kevin, because they want to get the stories. They want to investigate the crime professionally, and that's what they do on any crime. It's not if it's an officer involved type deal. That's just what they do with witnesses,
Yeah, witnesses, suspects, victims, everybody.
Yeah, so everybody's separated, and then one by one, they take Bruce out and be like, okay, where were you parked? What happened? Show us how you did it. Blah blah blah. They go through everything, and at one point they came and got me, and they're like, okay, Greg, park your car where it was at. So I parked the car, and they're looking at everything, and I go through I wasn't really involved in a whole lot of it because I was kind of like you. I kind of pulled up towards kind of the end of it, So they go through the questioning, and all of a sudden, all the detectives walk away from me, and they're all huddled up. And I'm thinking, oh crap, what's going on?
What did I say?
Yeah, did I say something?
Right.
And then one of them comes back over, and he's like, well, we figured out where all the gunshots went. But there's a bullet hole in the front bumper of your car. Where did that come from? And I look at the front bumper, and I'm like, oh yeah, don't worry about that. That was from something else. That didn't happen today. And they're just looking at me like, you're what? And I'm like, yeah, that was there. Don't worry about it.
No big deal.
And they're like, oh, thank God, because we could not figure that one out. And
Yeah.
we thought your story was convoluted because.
Well, yeah, because that would have been like a U-turn bullet.
Oh yeah,
who knows where that thing would have.
But it had them baffled. They're like looking at that thing, and they're just
which
like,
I thought was hilarious.
Oh yeah.
And so, and again, like Greg alluded to, that there's a lot of investigation that goes on. They investigate those, and the other reason that they separate us is so that there can be no allegations of impropriety as well, so that they can't say, oh yeah, those cops all got together. They were standing there for an hour getting their story straight. So it's understandable. Kind of sucks. Because you want to be, especially if you go through something crazy like that, you kind of want to be with your pals, a little moral support, but it is what it is. Well, the other follow-up on that is when there's a big investigation like that. So our department, basically employees of our department, were working in another jurisdiction, which is cool. There's nothing wrong with that. But our department still wants to have some involvement in the investigation along with the other departments whose jurisdiction it is. So the follow to that is that we had a guy named Al. He was a homicide detective, fantastic guy. You know, you've heard me talk about Tom, another homicide detective. You know, those guys were just phenomenal. They're great guys, super smart, super experienced. Well, Al gets sent out to kind of shadow Phoenix while they do their officer-involved shooting investigation. So we're pretty much set and taken care of at the scene, and guys are talking to people, and Al says, well, I'm going to go talk to this guy from the truck that Phoenix has. So Al goes over to the substation where they've got him in a temp lockup, and he walks in, and the Phoenix dicks are like, oh, you know what, we read him his rights, and he lawyered up. He's not talking. So I was like, okay, well, you know, I'd just kind of like to at least get in the same room with them and just see him. Like, okay. So Al goes in there, and if you knew Al, it would make so much more sense and it would be so much more enjoyable. But Al is just one of those guys that he can get anybody to say anything, and he'll trick you. He's sneaky, man. I've seen him do this in interviews so many times. Well, Al goes in there, and the guy's sitting there, and you know he's a little chewed up. He's kind of mangled up a little bit from the dog, and I think he even made a comment to Al like, I ain't saying shit. You know, I don't even know what you guys are talking about. I'm not talking. And I was like, hey, no problem. You know, that's no big deal. I wanted to come in. This is who I am. And, you know, probably give him some small talk to ease him down a little bit and take the edge off. And then he says, you know, I'm just here to kind of shadow Phoenix and make sure everything's cool, make sure they're doing their job, you know, whatever he had to say to kind of get on this guy's side. And so at one point, Al's looking at the guy and he says, man, you're pretty chewed up. Are you okay? Do you need some more medical attention or anything? And so the guy totally spontaneously goes, the hell, I'm chewed up. Those guys were shooting at me out there, you know? Oops. So the big oops, you know, of course, that puts the guy at the scene. It came up in court. It was a great moment. It's just funny how guys like Al, and again, as you get older, you kind of start to learn that stuff too. You learn how to get a little bit of info without, you know, trampling anybody's rights, and you kind of trick people into saying stuff. But I always thought that was hilarious. And Blair remembered it too, and he was cracking up as well.
Well, you got to, I mean, just to let people know that, you get advised of your Miranda rights, or we tell you your Miranda rights, and you're like, yeah, I don't want to talk to you without a lawyer. Well, we still have the right to talk to you. It's just not about what goes on.
The specifics of the crime.
Yeah. But we could still talk to you about
right.
the weather, whatever else.
Right.
You know, so just because he lawyered up or he didn't want to talk, Al wasn't asking him about the crime.
Nope. There's nothing wrong with it.
Nothing wrong with it at all.
No. And you got to understand, sometimes, let's say that you do a regular arrest and you're the transport officer and you kind of get stuck with this guy in the back of your car. Well, you got a dude in the back of your car and you're sitting there writing paper, and sometimes there's nothing else to do. And you may be there for an hour.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just like, you know, even you okay? You hot? You cold? You this, you that? And to be honest with you, a lot of times those guys, you know, because if you really start talking about the dynamics of criminals, they want to tell you what happened. If they're really smart, they don't, but they always want to talk about their crime. So you let these guys sit long enough in the back of a car, sometimes they'll just start talking. And it may not be directly tied to the crime, but sometimes it's, you know, gives you a little bit of a clue, we like to call it in the biz. And they're kind of like, you know, and you just have to be real careful. You can't ask questions to solicit the info once they've lawyered up, but you can let them talk all you want.
Absolutely.
And that's where, you know, a lot of guys, when you're smart, like, you know, what we would do is you'd always have a digital recorder handy, and you would just click that thing on and just make sure it was in a place to pick up that guy talking or girl talking in the back seat of that car. And that's all admissible. Because again, when they ask you, well, was he Miranda? Absolutely. Did he invoke? Yes. I asked them no questions, but they provided information XYZ.
Well, I hope criminals aren't listening, because now we're giving away a couple of trade secrets.
Okay, let me tell you about trade secrets.
So I think you need to stop babbling.
Listen to me,
Brown.
Down to. How many times do they make announcements on the DOC phone system? This line is being recorded. Please do not say anything. And how many times do those knuckleheads in prison, like, you know, confess to doing everything that they've done right there on the phone?
Well, they've already been proven not that smart.
Well, right. Well, if they're listening to the podcast, I don't know how
Okay,
smart they
all
are there
right,
either.
all right. You win.
Anyway, everything worked out pretty well. It was a super crazy, chaotic event in another jurisdiction. Poor communications, good people. Luckily, Bruiser didn't get run over. And, part of the main reason we call the episode Speed Bump is because for months after that was Bruce's nickname, Speed Bump. Because we still swore that somehow the man had gotten run over. We just didn't understand how he didn't show any signs of it. So Bruce was Speed Bump for quite a while.
Yeah.
So it was a good time, and everybody turned out okay, and we were okay. You got anything else you want to add or remember from the story?
I just want to throw, I just briefly remembered something because at one point I think we were kind of questioned on why did we decide to jump them at that particular spot? Like, why didn't we follow them and try to catch them in the, like doing a burglary when they're out of the cars? So there were some questions like, why didn't you do something along those lines? And, to kind of, in our defense and, after we explained it to these people, they were kind of like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But it's not easy to follow people.
No.
If you have 20 unmarked cars and you're following one car, it's a pain.
Yeah.
So now you only have 5 and we don't know where they're going. We don't know what they're going to do. We know that there was a potential they had weapons because they had stolen weapons in previous burglaries.
Right.
And at that point, they were all together. Where if you go do a burglary, you could have 3 in the alley, you could have 1 in the house, you could have 1 in the truck. They were all separated at the time, or they could be. But at that point, they were all together. It was morning, so there wasn't a ton of traffic in that parking lot. There weren't people out walking around or anything.
Right.
So we took all that into account, and we figured, we had appropriate resources to block the cars in and take them down. It just sometimes plans don't go as planned. And by the way, the other jerks or the other fine citizens in that Monte Carlo were eventually caught and arrested as well.
That's right. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, we sure did. We got them as well.
I just wanted to throw that out there that, you have to look at the circumstance and you're flying by the seat of your pants. You have to make a split-second decision. And we all thought at the time, they're all together. Chances of us getting them together here, all 5 of them or 4 of them, how many they were,
right,
was a lot better off than if we started trying to follow them and catch them in the act of a burglary or something along those lines. So right. I just wanted to throw that out there. So
no, good point. And just like Greg said, it's hard enough to follow 1 car, let alone 2. And if they were going to split up, now we've already lost, that option of getting them all. Things never work out the way you plan them. The one other big thing that I'll mention is anytime there's an officer-involved shooting or, something that's a real chaotic, mad event, people ask questions because that's kind of the way it is. And if you look back, every single time, you're going to think there's something that we could have done a little bit better. But, when you're crunching 79 different questions and you literally have seconds to make the decision as to what we're going to do, you do the best. Like you say, we wing it. We do the best we can. And that was the right thing to do. Absolutely.
Well,
there's no question.
No, and ultimately nobody got hurt.
Right.
The crime stopped. There were no more burglaries after that.
There were no crime trend.
There were no more those guys no longer committed crimes.
Right.
And again, we were all safe. Yeah, we had a couple banged up cars, and unfortunately, the owner of the truck got a banged up truck when he got it back.
Yeah, he did.
But that's just the nature of the beast. Yep. When it comes down to it.
Well, and a lot of the work we did, there's a number of stories where things get crazy. Some cars get smashed. Some people do get shot. We get shot at. There's a lot of stories that way. And this one ended up pretty good overall. Good. Considering a couple guys thought that Bruce basically got squashed.
Yeah.
So
speed bump
Bruce. So
so the moral of the story is don't run from the cops.
Perfect way to end it right there. And again, I'm going to close out, but Greg, again, thank you so much. I had a good time, and I completely anticipate having you back in here again and putting you on the microphone and talking about some other good times.
Absolutely. We got some other stories.
Yes, sir, we do. So guys, with that episode, I close out. I barely got here for another session. Thank you so much for listening. If you like the show, I'd like you to subscribe. Please post a review if you can. Ask your friends to give it a listen. If you have a question or comment, shoot me an email at ibarelygodhere@gmail.com. And also, don't forget to follow the podcast on Instagram and Facebook. Sam42.
Zebra 41.
We are 10-7.